Greetings, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on generational leadership, bridging the gaps. I am very pleased to send you heartfelt greetings from my office in the School of Public Service at DePaul University. If you are new to the school, we offer 6 graduate level degrees for people seeking to be advocates and a force for change in all sectors. I am thrilled to have you with me this morning, connecting from a number of areas in the U.S. and also, I hope, Kenya. There is a legend that St. Vincent de Paul, who died in 1660, said his only regret was a wish that he could have done more. I am just beginning to try to do more by reaching more people with information on value-centered leadership theory and practices through these webinars. I do not anticipate any technological difficulties, but if any should occur, I do have all of your email addresses and will send you a recorded version of the webinar. We are going to see if I can talk and run technology at the same time. Again, it is my pleasure to welcome you. Let's begin. There are several issues around leading the generations. So I want to begin with a little bit of background. One of them is the fact that, as you may have heard, baby boomers will be leaving the workforce in huge numbers, have started already. So the concern about this is said to have begun in 2001 with a national study that revealed that about 75% of the nonprofit executive directors at that time planned to leave their jobs in the next 5 years. And so we know that that's already begun, and it's happening to a lot of nonprofits, that they're losing their people, some of whom have been around for decades. So the history and wisdom and experience of these people is leaving with them. So this was kind of a wake-up call when this study was revealed. There's also another issue, which is a shift in expectations. You know, in the business community as well as in the nonprofit organization, Jeremy Rifkin points out that we're experiencing this generational shift, and that older men and women in the workforce tend to think more in terms of organizing economic activity from the top down, organizing decision making from the top down, etc., just because it's the way in which things have been done during their lifetime. But those who are 40 years old and younger have grown up in a very different world. I believe that part of that is the fact that, you know, we viewed the Earth from space for the first time in the 60s, and that has led to a paradigm shift of great magnitude in terms of our way of thinking about our world, our universe, our reality. And so thinking about our organizational styles, our leadership styles in a much more dynamic, collaborative, flat, some people would say, way. So there's two worldviews that are in conflict. Another issue, which I alluded to before in terms of the departure of the older generation from nonprofit organizations, is that we need to consciously pass on the knowledge and experience of older generations and at the same time be open to learning from younger generations. So there can be a tension in your organization with that reality as well. One of the other things I'd like to point out is that I do all of my leadership training from the values-based standpoint. And so when we're talking about worldviews, we're talking about a lot of that is underlying, has to do with our beliefs, our understandings of reality, our understandings of the way things work. And so that can bring in a lot of conflict if you're working out of different worldviews when you're together trying to work on a project. And there's a difference between the kinds of conflicts that happen in organizations, and I just want to briefly point that out. That we have what can be called needs-based conflicts. There are some, especially those who work in the nonviolent communication area, that as human beings, we do everything to meet a need. We're always trying to meet some kind of need, whether it's food or shelter, and we'll go into that in a minute, but those kinds of conflicts can be easily resolved. It's the value-based conflicts that are much more complex, and as this one author from the Center for Creative Leadership points out, depending on how closely held values are, these differences can result in dramatic conflicts and may end up in creating the situation where people just have to agree to disagree. So let's look, for example, at some of the needs that can be resolved. Food, of course, being an essential one. And if you're together in a workplace and the group is trying to decide how to celebrate someone's birthday, and you may have differences of opinion about the kind of food to eat. You know, it could be an Italian restaurant, could be a Mexican, could be an Asian. But once you decide that, once people come to an agreement on a preference of food type, you can move forward with where to go, and we're all going to at least eat. You know, if I need to eat, and I don't, you know, it's not going to be an overwhelming thing for me to not eat Mexican or Asian or Italian. I have to like all three, so I could go with any one of those. But if we get into values, like, for example, do I prefer to spend my money on an expensive restaurant? Do I want to sit down at a table where there's tablecloth and nice silverware, or are we going to go to a fast food restaurant? Those kinds of, that makes it a lot stickier, a lot more conflictual, because now we're talking about values instead of just needs. So I hope that's clear. What is a value? I like this definition from my colleague Ron Nazer, who says a value is any belief, principle, or virtue held so deeply, consciously or unconsciously, that it guides our behaviors, decisions, and actions. And that's why values are so important in the context of leadership, because we can be operating, or in teamwork, we can be operating out of values that we aren't even aware of until it comes to our attention. And here's another definition that says, it is our values that move us, bind us together, push us apart, and generally make the world go round. So values are quite important. I also use in my facilitation work this notion of what I call the deep structure of choice. So it's not enough to know about values, but we have to know where the values come from. And they come from our life experiences, which help us in shaping our perspective on the world, our perspective on life. And it's out of those needs and values and perspectives and experiences that we come to every choice that we make every day as part of a family, as part of a team. And when we're talking about an intergenerational workforce, we're talking about a place in which people have different life experiences, and those different life experiences result in a different perspective. The different perspectives enrich and enliven and create different values. And so if we're going to make choices together, we need to back up and not just sit at the table and argue about the fact that my choice is different from your choice, but I need to learn where your values are coming from, where your choice is coming from out of the values that you hold, and those values come from your life experiences. So tell me the story behind the position that you're holding. Don't just tell me your position. It's so important, I think, in trying to bring a team, an entire corporation of people to get behind a particular choice. Okay, with that much as background, let's just look briefly at what is a generation. Some of you may already be familiar with this, but we'll just review that a generation is, by the researchers, is considered to be a cohort of people who were born during the same time period. And usually that's 20 or 30 years, but if you go into this reading the different research, you'll find that no one is kind of in agreement on any of this, really. But there's a lot of generalizations going on, so we have to be attentive to that. But in general, we're talking about the fact that this group of people were the same age at the time that certain major pivotal events happened in the world, locally, and within their families. So as given here, the different examples like World War II or the Civil Rights Movement or different musicians, rap music, whatever we're talking about, people were the same age when those things emerged in the culture or happened in the world. So they possess a shared memory of these events. Particularly, now we're talking perhaps within the same country, but also with technology the way it is today, and since we've had television and a global consciousness, that some of these things are in fact shared by people no matter what country you're in. And what the researchers have found is that the fact that people have experienced these same events at the same time often means they have similar assumptions and similar values that are influenced by these life experiences. And most people talk about, we're going to talk about 4 basic generational categories, generational cohorts, because researchers are saying now that it's these 4 that are in the workplace at the same time. And some are saying that this is actually the first time in history that organizations have had to cope with the fact that 4 generations are working at the same time. And that's, you can probably guess why that would be. The older people are living longer, and younger people are coming into the workforce at earlier ages than they used to. So we have the veterans, these different names given to this oldest generation. Some people call them traditionals, some people call them the silent generation because they weren't the protesters of the 60s. Individuals born between 1928 and 1945. And then we have the baby boomers, of course I'm sure you've heard of them, people born between 46 and 64. And the Gen Xers between 65 and 80. And the Gen Y millennials, and you can see the different percentages. It's growing in terms of the younger generations and the percentage of them in the workforce. Okay, now we're going to try a poll because I want to find out of the people who are on the webinar with me today, how many of you are in which generation? So we'll see if I can make the technology work. You should be able to choose from one of these categories on your computer. So I'll give you a minute to do that. And then I'll close the poll. And share the results. And it looks like we don't have any veterans. We have 25% of the people on the call are baby boomers. We have 31% Gen Xers and 44% Gen Y. So thanks very much for doing that. Okay, so just for the benefit of those of us who might be in a situation where we are actually working with some folks in this older generation, I'll share a few of their characteristics and the life-shaping events. These are people who lived, obviously, some of them, if they were born between 28 and 45, lived through World War II, lived through the first manned spaceflight and a significant increase in, at least here in the United States, in economic prosperity. They became homeowners and first ones to own televisions, had that whole experience. And what's important to us, though, in working with them, is that according to the research, again, these are some general traits for this generation of people, that they're very respectful of authority, they're hierarchical in their thinking about organizations and decision making, very loyal to their institutions, considered rule makers and conformists, and motivated by financial rewards. These people grew up in the United States during the Depression, so they are very interested in helping the next generation financially, so they were very focused on earnings. Here are some of their core values, according to the research again. Dedication and sacrifice, hard work, conformity, law and order, respect for authority, duty before pleasure, adherence to rules, honor and national pride. If you have grandparents, you might talk to them about this kind of thing at some point. Older grandparents, that is, the baby boomers, or some of us youngers who might have had people who are living in these. For some of us, it might be our great grandparents. So we won't do this poll because we don't have anyone on the site who fell into this generation. But you get ready, because I'm going to ask you this for the generations that you've self-identified with. But because I'm interested in whether or not you feel that the research is accurate or not. So if there were any people in the traditionalists on this call, I would have done this poll for them, but we'll skip by. Okay, the baby boomers. We have a few of them on this call, so let's take a look more deeply at them. Life-changing events, born after the end of World War II, but lived through the Vietnam War and were young during the Korean War. Significant here in the United States, lived through the assassination of the Kennedys and Martin Luther King, the widespread protests of the 60s, the older members of this generation of the civil rights movement, and Watergate and Nixon's resignation, which was the first blow to the respect for the presidency in this country. And this generation is considered to be highly anti-authoritarian, idealistic, motivated by changing the world, and competitive. That certainly was my experience. I was born in '53, so I'm kind of in the middle of this boomer place, and was in high school during a lot of the Vietnam War protests and whatnot. So becoming world conscious and becoming conscious about making the world a better place was an important piece. And core values of this group, again, this is based on research done into the generations. Very hardworking, in fact, probably to the extreme of workaholism might be. Optimistic, have a team orientation. Is concerned with personal gratification as looking out for others. Very much into health and wellness, and that whole understanding that life is about more than just working really hard, although we worked really hard. Also interested in personal growth, the whole personal growth movement, all the movements, that came in the 60s that had to do with interior as well as looking at life from the exterior, into successful lifestyles, and into being involved on boards, and especially with, for nonprofits, that would be a concern. Okay, so here's our next poll, and I'm going to launch that one for the boomers. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So we have, we just do it in percentages, 75% all of them and 25% a few of them. So if you're among either of those groups, maybe you could use the chat function to make a comment about how you responded. And I'll hide the poll if you want to get ready to, if you want to do that and work on that, and I'll go back and look in the chats momentarily. Again, this is according to the research, and which, as I said before, is tends to be generalized. So we want to remember that. So it's not going to apply to everybody, but it's interesting that 75% of you who are in that generation did agree with that assessment. So the Gen Xers, key life-shaping events: the end of the Cold War, the entry of women into the workplace, and the increase in parents' divorce, the researchers say, and the increase in parents' unemployment. And so these events, some of you may have heard the term latchkey children, children who are left at home because the mothers are working when they come home from school. So that has resulted in some key character traits, including self-reliant, anti-institutional, rule morphing, in other words, trying to maybe get around the rules. Because I would think that, you know, the whole increase in parents' divorce rates, I know actually my parents divorced late in life. They actually got remarried about 5 years after that. But I remember when that happened, it really turns your world upside down. And you begin to, you know, question, well, what is family? What is this this thing that I was a part of? And so I can see where things would begin to shift in your worldview, in your understanding of things. And so the rules aren't the rules anymore. You know, it used to be people never got divorced, and then now they're getting divorced. And so just that one event has a ripple effect on different things that go on. And of course, this is the beginning of the information-rich kind of generations. Born in '65, you know, we were all, back in the '60s, every family had their set of encyclopedias, and it was just the beginning of the information, you know, overload age. Kind of, we had all kinds of information at our fingertips, and of course, as we know, it gets even more so as we move on. So out of these life experiences, again, with the shaping of their perspective on life and on the world, we have some core values that are affected that are very different from the previous generations. A valuing of diversity, thinking globally. It's searching for balance in their life, and trying to balance work and life. I have a neighbor who's a baby boomer who has younger people working with him, and he's constantly, when we chat in the backyard, he's often complaining about the younger folks who work with him, because he's, you know, he says, my generation lived to work and this generation works to live. You know, that we have a completely different approach to the work ethic. So as you can see, there's room for conflict here because we're talking about values that are very different. So if you're in this generation, let's try the poll and see whether or not these values are ones that seem consistent for you or not. So I'm going to launch the poll. And give you some time to respond. Ah, great. Okay, I'll close the poll and share the results. So again, we have the majority of people saying that most of these values or all of them are in agreement with, as far as they're concerned, they match up and or resonate, at least with this list of values. So you can see how we are going to end up with some kind of conflict if we don't be attentive to this reality within the workplace. Okay, let's see. I'm just going to pause here for a second and see if I can find any questions or comments from people previously. Okay. Thanks, Kathy. Has said that she identifies with all of the key traits, but only half of the core values. That's in response to the question I asked of, I believe, the previous generation. Yeah, for the baby boomers. Yeah. Okay, so let's go on to Generation Y and the millennials. And this, I love this little graphic here because this is the generation that is connected through technology. Oh, I'm just amazed as I walk around campus here or ride in an elevator or take the L between our campuses here in Chicago. The number of people who have an electronic device in their hand at all times who fit into this generation. So um, I think I'm just looking at this slide. I got so taken by this slide, I think I went ahead of their traits. So these character shaping folks, events that happened to these folks, the terrorism, of course, of 9/11, the school violence here in the United States, which is a huge and growing issue, but it began with Columbine, and a sensitivity and awareness to global warming, the natural disasters that have resulted from climate change, the AIDS pandemic, all of these things, and again, the working mothers and and a different attitude of mothers towards their children, even, and parents, both mothers and fathers, towards their children. And of course, we've had much published on child raising and all that from that the traditionals, for example, didn't have when they were raising children. So a whole different kind of culture as far as children are concerned, here in the United States anyway. And so some key traits coming out of this is socially responsible. This generation is described as researchers, as we all know, technologically advanced, because we all turn to them or their younger brothers and sisters to help us, those of us in the older generation, to help us with our technology. Concerned about the environment, because these people have lived with events like Earth Day, going on through their entire life. They've viewed the image of the Earth from space and images from the Hubble telescope, and so they're really living in the dynamic, organic, interconnected universe of the future in a way that those of us who were born before the 60s in some ways cannot, do not, or just haven't yet. Also described as tolerant and family-centered. This is a generation of students who've been very actively supported by their parents. So their core values: optimism, civic duty, confidence, achievement, a sense that even though the world is a mess, they're going to be able to fix it. And one of the things I have been so impressed with in terms of meeting people in this age bracket is that actually the consciousness they have of volunteering and being socially active in ways that I think my generation didn't so much. So if you're in this generation, again, just these few values that we have identified here, we'll go ahead and do our last poll and see whether or not you agree with the researchers in terms of some of the values that are suggested. Okay, I'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So we have the majority of you agreeing with this list. Anyone want to make a comment from this generation? Go ahead and do that in the box that you have there for connecting with me, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. So thank you for participating in the polls. I have to put this back where it belongs. Okay. And okay. So now that we've explored the generations a bit, let's look at a little more deeply at some of the challenges. Okay. As I've mentioned, the fact that these different generations with these different values and perspectives are trying to work together can cause some conflict. And that conflict any kind of conflict can lead to a lack of teamwork and lower productivity. But the thing we need to be aware of as leaders or people, even team members who are working in an intergenerational environment is maybe the conflict isn't actually about the task or the thing that we're talking about. Maybe it goes much deeper than that. Maybe it goes into this different perspective and values that's connected to the generational piece. So as leaders, we have to figure out, first of all, how to have the conversation. And, I share some of this information and I also have this topic as part of my Level 2 leadership workshop because it gives people, I invite people to take this information and share it with others, share it, with your team and have a conversation. That is the best way to avoid conflict is to share information and create a dialogue with the people that you're working with. If you can do that up front, before you get to the conflict, then it serves in two ways. You may avoid the conflict altogether, or when the conflict emerges, you have something to fall back on. You can say, remember when we had that conversation about generational differences? I'm wondering if maybe that's playing a role here in this conflict that we're experiencing. So you have something, even if it's not necessary at the moment, you can fall back on it. So I encourage communication, communication, communication in terms of leadership. It also, this last point here, interpersonal stress and decreased focus on customer service. Well, of course, that's going to be the case if there is stress within the workplace. I remember being a customer in a office supply store where the people behind the desk were engaged in a conflict with one another, and I'm like, what about me here, folks? But the other thing that I just want to point out in terms of this, with this focus on customer service here, is that don't forget that you're dealing with customers or clients in your agency who are coming from these different generations. So you have to be attentive to the different values, the different traits, the different characteristics, the different expectations, even with the people that you're talking about or working with, talking to. So another aspect of this, we talked a little bit about the hierarchy, and it means that, again, people coming from different generations are going to have a different desire for a organizational structure that in the past, the traditionals, the veteran generation, even some of the older boomers, they were very accustomed to this notion of the hierarchy of authority in organizations and the quote-unquote chain of command, and seeing organizational charts that look like this one, where people at the top and it goes down and down and down. And but again, with the emergence of a different generation, the end of the 20th century, we're seeing less traditional forms of organizations, and I'm sure you're probably familiar with this, but also different success factors that in the past, organizations were thought to succeed because they were big, because there was specialization, because there was good control. And in our current environment, people are saying that, people are saying that we need speed, flexibility, and integration, and that all of that happens much better with an open systems concept or a flat organization. So again, as leaders in a nonprofit organization, in an organization, we need to be thinking, what's the expectation around how we function and how we are structured? If you're familiar with the idea of organizational frames, the structural frame, how is that looking for different people? Some of the opportunities, however, that come from the idea of generational leadership are, that if we can create a holistic view of multi-generational workers and understand the diverse composition of our employees, we have lots of opportunities to work with that. We can share power in decision-making process, and for older folks that might at first be a new experience, people might be hesitant to even talk up in a meeting because they're not accustomed to it. It's not the way they grew up. It's not the habit that they have, but people can change habits and change expectations. But you got to do it in an encouraging, safe environment kind of way. And again, with embracing technology, many older people are very fearful of it. My father, who was in his early 80s when he died in 2003, he was very hesitant to get involved with email. And he was living in San Diego, I was living here in the Chicago area, and I kept encouraging him to do that and, to get on to AOL at that time, which was about what anybody was doing then. And at first, he was very hesitant to do it, and then eventually, once he got on it, once he got going with it and got comfortable with it, he was using it to write letters to the editor of the newspaper. He was sharing jokes with his, he was long retired, but he was still could be in touch with some of the people that he had worked with, and they were sharing jokes back and forth, and so he loved it. I mean, he was on it all the time. So just to, recognize that people slowly can change their habits, change their minds, move into this, but they need training and they need encouragement. And then, of course, finally, if we remove a lot of the tension and stress that is causing frustration because of the generational differences, we'll be better at serving the people that we're intended to serve. Again, we as leaders in organizations, we have to be attentive to the leadership style of each of these and expectations around leadership style. And so we ourselves have to be flexible and recognize that baby boomers are accustomed to this more maybe autocratic leadership style, and so might want to talk to them about that. And how would you like me to lead you? What makes you feel comfortable? And according to my former colleague Tom Mayer, who was the first one to introduce me to this material, he was assistant professor in the School of Hospitality here at DePaul, and he's he's since departed and gone to another institution, but you know, he recommended, and I agree, that Generation X people might, depending on, again, you know, there's 20 or 30 years we're looking at, so some of the older people might be different than the newer people in that cohort, but they might be interested in the transactional approach to leadership, you know, which is you do this for me and I'll reward you with this paycheck, you know, or these benefits, or a more transformational leadership style. And what the research says is that certainly the Gen Y people, that's their focus, that as leaders, it's not just about the task, it's about what happens for the people, what happens for the organization in particular, and how this organization keeps growing and evolving and advancing, and that thinking of our organization as dynamic and interacting with the community and learning from the community and changing and responding to different needs, rather than a very static, hierarchical, controlled, insulated environment in which we just do what, you know, we just come here to work, do what we're supposed to do, and the organization is going to be successful because it always has been. I hope that is making sense to people. To bridge the gaps, you know, we need to focus on the positive attributes and strengths that each coworker brings, to concentrate on establishing cooperative working relationships across the generations, and highlight collaboration as an important organizational value. I'm going to pause here for another minute just to see if there are any comments. Okay, Emily, I'm happy to see civic duty as a widespread millennial value. I'm a millennial and I definitely see this value in most of my peers. And Kathy, not just communication, but how various individuals and groups prefer to get their communication. Yes, oh, that is so important, and something that I'm part of a group of people here at DePaul, and we're trying to figure out how we can make all of the resources that are available to students, particularly first-generation students that are here at DePaul, accessible, more accessible to students. And at the moment, we've just recently realized that anything that's on our websites, our DePaul, official DePaul websites, that directs students towards these resources has a landline phone number and an email address. And we know from all the research that's not what the young people are using. So this is going to be huge in terms of trying to make this transition to talking to people. I know you might have gone onto some websites, actually even the GoToWebinar website, immediately there's a chat window that opens up, and there's somebody, a salesperson for GoToWebinar, who says, can I help you? You know, so this instant, the way to communicate and the fact that communication has to be instant is changing things. And now Whitney's asking a question, do you have suggestions on how to address generational differences without potentially making some staff uncomfortable? Yes, it's inherently, we're talking about, you're saying it's inherently age-based. I would put it in the context, again, of life experience. You know, that we all have lived a life, and what I like about this material is that it says that if you were born within these particular years, you've experienced as a cohort life in a different way than other people. So you can go online and as a follow-up to this, I can send out a way to use this as an assessment, a way to use this material as a conversation piece with people. You can practice on people you know from different generations even, and see how they respond to it. But that would be my suggestion, is that if you have a team meeting, if you have a staff meeting, that you can go into that meeting and say, the other day I attended a webinar on generational differences, and I'd just like to talk about it a little bit. And here's some of the information, and let's just have a conversation about it. And that's what I would do. But yes, Carol is making the observation that we're talking about a similar sort of thing to personality type tests. I mean, everybody's got different opinions about the validity and the justification for using any type of personality test or any kind of way of defining people through these kinds of assessments. But what I think is none of them are completely accurate. You're always running into the danger of generalization. But what I like about it and why I use them in my leadership development workshops and courses is because they give people a common language. We can't have a conversation unless we have a common language about which we're going to discuss this topic. And so, it as we saw in the polls, people don't 100% agree with what this research is indicating, but at least we have some words to look at and begin the conversation. And I can learn more about you because you either agree with this or you don't agree with it. But and I hope that I'm creating as a leader a safe enough environment that we can do that. And you can feel comfortable saying you agree with it or don't agree with it. And we can begin to share the story of our lives. And I think that's so important, as I said, to how we can get through these differences and understand one another. That if you see my behavior, if you only see my behaviors, you won't understand them unless you understand the person behind the behavior. So I hope that's helpful. I have to get, okay. Yeah, so you can begin to build community by constructing shared values. So if we understand how, because of our different life experiences, we might have different values, then we go back to the organizational values, the organizational mission statement, the organizational vision, and say, what part of this does speak to you, so that we can begin to understand why we're all committed to this same thing. And then we can begin to work toward positive changes, both in the working relationships with peers and with our service to our customers, so that we're creating in the environment of the workplace positive energy that creeps out into how, what our customers experience as well. So we can use, as I said, when we get done here and I do the follow-up email to everybody, I'll indicate what kinds of assessment tools we can have. But it can be really simple, like just asking the other person over lunch or in a team meeting, wherever, what would you say the key events are and experiences in your life that most influenced you? And how do you think they influenced you? How do you think they've influenced the way you view the world and how you approach work? And what would be helpful for others to know to better understand you? When I've done this with large groups in a workshop setting, I actually ask for volunteers from each generation, and I put them on a panel, and I ask them to tell these stories. And let me tell you, there were some pretty powerful stories, especially from the traditional veterans generation, about key events that shaped their lives, and you just get a whole different understanding of people when you do this. So just again, how you can use this information with your team or in your organization. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. Now it's your turn to again ask some questions, make some comments. I'll pull that question box out here again. and just see if anyone have a question for me? You also should have the possibility of raising your hand if you want, and I could unmute your mic if you want to just talk with us. Or if there's anything that you would like me to go back and say more about. Sure, Kathy, it's saying it's important to be aware of generational and other differences, but we should also look for commonalities. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and again, the only way you're going to do that is if you take the time away from the task and have these kinds of conversations. And that, I think, is the hardest thing for people to do. You know, that we even if you have weekly meetings, which I recommend. It's certainly a meeting every 2 weeks. I think once a month is not enough. But if you have meetings and can schedule this as, you know, even if it's only 15 minutes, or you could use it as a, if you follow the check-in, check-out kind of procedure at meetings, you could use this as a check-in question. You know, thinking back over your life, what was a significant world event or event in this country that you think might have had an impact on the way you look at the world and the way you think about work? Oh, interesting question, Carol. Which generation do you think is most adaptable or tolerant of the other generations? I actually haven't come across anything in the research that I've read that would indicate that, because you would think, given that diversity is one of the highly valued traits of Gen Y or Gen X, that they would just automatically approach older generations with more tolerance or acceptance. But I think in the work setting, we're talking about the what it is over which there might be a conflict because of the generation. And I don't think, maybe other people would have an opinion of this, but I think it could be that traits of the older generations in behavioral traits, let's say, would be frustrating for them, even though they might conceptually understand this diversity thing. So, but to be honest, I haven't seen that in what I've read. So that's it's a good something to consider, in terms of what else we might want to consider. And again, I'll send this PowerPoint so you can see the resources I've used when we do the follow-up. Okay, well, not seeing any more questions. I think I'll bring this to a close by just saying thank you so much for, oh, wait, something else has come in. Get your applied integrated project. I choose a church. I found that the same principles in the workforce applied in the church. Oh, okay. Thank you, Levine. Yeah, I think it would be. I mean, a church is another, nonprofit organization. So there you go. Wherever groups of people are coming together in different groups. Okay, I'll wait, Levine, for you to finish your response. Yeah, and how we create understanding Lefane is pointing out that understanding is key. How we create understanding is through dialogue. We can't know another person and what they're thinking, because we don't read minds, unless we have a conversation with them. And that is so critical to changing everything, changing my perspective of them, changing their relationship to me, their understanding of how I value them, how I respect them, how I am open to who they are. So all of that comes into, I can't say that enough, just the way to avoid conflicts is to dialogue with people, and to understand what the expectations are. So again, now we really are coming up on the end of the time together here, so I want to, again, thank you so much for being with me today, and it's always nice to see people actually show up and want to spend some time talking about important topics. I'll have some more webinars in our spring quarter, which begins in April, so I'll send you out announcements about that, and once again, I really appreciate you being with me, and here's my contact information if you don't already have it. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much. Bye.